for a Photoshop project. What is next? The next step in the building process is to go through design plans with peers, if you have any, and clients, even if those clients are internal to your company. In the case of our ad agency, that situation would be rare, as most of our clients are external. I will use the home remodel ad campaign project as the background to cover the steps in the design process. First, we will want to sketch what we want in the project, which for Photoshop would be sketches of images used in the project. Why sketch? Sketching allows for no pressure, free-flowing ideas to come to fruition. It helps drive the specifications for a project, which are the detailed items needed to ensure the project fulfills its intent for the client and the overall audience of the project. Think of sketching as an opportunity to stage potential photo shoots. Sketching allows one to get and show ideas without worrying about making them look good digitally. Next, we will want to establish a design process, which is the order of steps taken to get from steps to finished product. As part of the design process, ask, do we already have photos we can use for a project? And if we need more, how many need to be taken? And do we have a specific order in which they need to be taken to get a project out on time? If the photos will be used on a website, a wireframe should be built as a visual guide that represents the overall look of a project, often a website. That wireframe will eventually turn into a prototype, which doesn't contain live content, but looks as close to the finished product as possible. Iterations are part of the design process. An iteration is a cycle of a design plan. Sketches, wireframes, and prototypes are all examples of iterations. So are drafts, which are meant to look like the finished product. As part of the design process, we also have change orders and a feedback loop that go somewhat together. A feedback loop is the order in which feedback is presented on an aspect of a project. For example, you may have peers first look at a prototype, and then the next step may be getting client feedback. Feedback usually will spurn change orders on a project. Change orders are formal changes to a project scope, which we will define in the next topic. Change orders need to be officially requested and approved or denied after being part of the feedback loop. Change orders need to be tracked because a change that is not tracked leads to miscommunication, unnecessary work, and inevitably a delay and a lack of quality on a project. Let's now look at some basic project management concepts that people in the design industry need to know: project scope and scope creep. A project scope is the definition of the project and its details, such as the how, why, and when. This document is the project scope for the home remodel ad campaign. Whereas a project scope defines the parameters of a project, scope creep is the act of unauthorized change to a project scope. This unauthorized change is something you want to avoid, period. Nothing derails a project timeline and possibly a budget faster than scope creep. Use the change order process we covered in the previous topic to avoid scope creep. We mentioned the design process concept a little earlier regarding the medium or media on which a project will be distributed. As part of that design process, we also need to consider things such as whether we have photos we can use and edit, or whether we need to shoot new photos. We also need to think about where we will save our files. For instance, when I go to save a copy of this file, it asks me whether I want to save the file to the cloud, where others can collaborate on a project, or do I want to save this locally and be the only person working on the file until I am ready to collaborate with others on this project. This file management process covers where files are stored and how they will be accessed, edited, and saved, which is crucial to project success. You will want to establish and follow through with where to save files early in a project, preferably before you even start on that project. You may use third-party content, such as images, text, or video, from others in many Adobe projects. When doing so, we must identify legal and ethical considerations for using that content, such as for copyright, which gives the creator an original work exclusive rights to copy, distribute, and perform a created work. Anyone seeking copyrighted information must seek permission to use the work. Failure to do so can result in fines and earn someone a reputation for stealing other people's content, which will not help an individual or business succeed in any project. One form of licensing for using third-party content is Creative Commons. Creative Commons is a license that gives others permission to share, use, or add to a created work. For example, when using a search engine to look for images to use in a project, often that search can be filtered only to show images with a Creative Commons license. With that, the terms for using those images and other works are usually defined in the results. You need to know the basics we have just covered for the exam about Creative Commons licensing. You also need to be able to see a Creative Commons license and interpret it. Here are some examples. You're probably wondering what all of these symbols mean. Well, here's a rundown of each. BY, attribution, meaning you need to credit the original author for the work you are using. Think of it this way. You are crediting the original work by someone. And C, non-commercial, meaning you can use the work if you are not charging people for it. The opposite would be commercial use, which means you would charge for a work someone else authored, which almost always means a royalty payment is due to that author. For example, you may use a photo of a blog someone posted on a vacation villa, but you cannot collect any money for using that photo. ND, no derivatives, meaning no derivatives of the work. In other words, the work can be used but cannot be altered. If you're using someone else's photo, it has to be used as is, with no edits. SA, share alike. When using the work, share it with the same license as what is applied to the original work. If you are using a work for non-commercial purposes, share it as such. While on licensing, let's ensure we understand what licensing means in this context. Licensing grants someone permission to use a work. For instance, if I wanted to showcase a copyrighted logo, I would need to get written permission from the copyright holder. That permission usually dictates what you can and cannot do with the copyrighted work. Sometimes that permission comes as a fee, such as what people will pay to use stock photos. The other type of permission, public domain, is not a permission but a state of work, in which it becomes free for use 50 to 100 years after an author's death. Terms of this use depend upon the type of work involved. Some other legal and ethical considerations for using other people's work include intellectual property, which is work born of the mind, such as an invention, trade secret, or literary or artistic work. Derivative works include one or many copyright-protected elements of an original. For example, a painting similar to an original painting is considered a derivative work. Work for hire is work for pay. Any work of this type should be stipulated in a contract. The owner of the finished work needs to be spelled out within the contract. In the case of photos, is the fee for the work a one-time fee? Or will the author collect royalties anytime the image is used? Next, we have fair use and fair dealing. Fair use provides for limited use of copyright material without acquiring permission. Examples include stock photos or a snippet of a song to use as a jingle. With fair use, the key question is, does using this work cost the original rights holder money? You should be able to use the work without issues if the answer is no. Fair use is the U.S. term, while fair dealing is the international term for this consideration. Lastly, we have stock images, which are images available to use, and another area to consider for legal use of third-party content. I am on the Adobe Stock Images website, and we'll search for kitchen, as we need some good kitchen photos for the home remodel ad campaign. I've searched this site using the word kitchen, and we see many results. The key concept here is that the same rules we have covered for properly using third-party content apply to these stock images. This site is a paid site, so these images cannot be used for free except for any trial period. If I select one of these images, we see that we can get either a standard or extended license. And in selecting either one, we see the differences between standard and extended licenses. Though we have covered some licensing standards, anything outside those standards is subject to the company from which you are obtaining stock images. In addition to getting permission on copyrighted material, there are two specific types of permissions called releases you may need to obtain. The first such release is a model release. A model release is a signed document allowing for using someone's likeness or image in a project or both. A model release could be necessary when using a picture of someone in a project. One needs to be specific about what can be shown from a model. For instance, permission to use a photo is separate from a person's face or other identifying features. Here we see an example of model and location releases we could use for our ad campaign projects. These releases are necessary as many photos will contain people in them. Similar to a model release, a location release allows one to use a photo of a landmark, famous building, or privately owned building. Some location releases require compensation, and some do not. Either way, as is the case with legal and ethical considerations, get a model or location release if in doubt, as using someone or something's likeness illegally can result in a lawsuit and a lot of lost money.